Sometimes the smallest acts of cruelty reveal the biggest truths about who we really are. In a crowded room full of strangers, one young man's thoughtless words would shatter a woman's composure and force an entire military dining hall to confront a lesson they would never forget. What started as an ordinary lunch break would become a moment that changed everyone who witnessed it, proving that heroes don't always wear medals and that the strongest people sometimes carry the heaviest burdens in silence. The morning sun hung low over Fort Carson, Colorado, casting long shadows across the training grounds where hundreds of soldiers began their daily routines. The air smelled of fresh coffee and diesel fuel, a combination that somehow became comforting to those who lived on the base. Sergeant Maria Santos walked briskly toward the administrative building, her boots hitting the pavement with practiced rhythm. At 28 years old, she had spent nearly a decade in the Army, climbing through the ranks with quiet determination. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation bun, not a strand out of place. Her uniform was crisp, pressed with the kind of precision that spoke of discipline and pride. Maria was known around the base as someone who got things done. She worked in logistics, coordinating supply chains and equipment distribution for multiple units. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was essential. Without people like her, missions would fall apart before they even began. She had a reputation for being thorough, professional, and efficient. Some thought she was too serious, too focused. They didn't know her well enough to understand why. The mess hall at Fort Carson could hold nearly 500 people at once. During lunch hour, it became a sea of camouflage uniforms, trays clattering and voices mixing into a constant hum of conversation. Soldiers fresh from training exercises sat next to desk workers who'd been shuffling papers all morning. Officers ate alongside enlisted personnel, and though rank still mattered, the mess hall was one of the few places where everyone shared the same space and the same food. Maria usually ate lunch alone. She preferred it that way. While others gathered in groups, sharing stories and jokes, she would find a corner table, review her afternoon schedule, and eat quickly before returning to work. People had stopped inviting her to join them months ago, mistaking her preference for solitude as unfriendliness. But Maria wasn't unfriendly. She was protecting herself, building walls that had become necessary for survival. On this particular Tuesday, the mess hall was more crowded than usual. A new group of recruits had arrived the day before, adding to the already substantial population on base. Maria filled her tray with the standard fare: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, a roll, and a cup of coffee that looked like it had been sitting on the burner too long. She scanned the room for an empty table but found none. Every seat seemed occupied by clusters of soldiers, laughing, eating, and enjoying their brief respite from duty. She spotted a table near the back with only one person sitting at it, a young private who looked barely out of high school. He was hunched over his phone, scrolling with one hand while shoveling food into his mouth with the other. Maria approached and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, her voice neutral and polite. The private looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten he was in a public space. He had the kind of face that still held traces of teenage acne, and his uniform looked brand new, without the worn-in quality that came from months of wear. Sure, yeah, go ahead," he mumbled, returning his attention to his phone. Maria sat down and began eating methodically. She wasn't one to engage in small talk with strangers, so she was content with the silence. The private seemed equally uninterested in conversation, which suited her fine. She had paperwork to review mentally, preparing herself for the afternoon's meetings. Everything seemed normal, routine. Just another lunch in a long series of identical lunches. Then 2 more soldiers approached the table. They were also young, probably friends with the private. One was tall and lanky with a sunburned nose, the other shorter and stockier with a thick southern accent that carried across the mess hall before they even reached the table. "Hey Jackson, man, we've been looking for you," the tall one said, dropping his tray onto the table with a loud clatter. "You disappeared after formation." Jackson, the private with the phone, shrugged. "Needed food. You know how Sergeant Miller runs us into the ground during PT." The 3 young men fell into easy conversation, talking about their training exercises, complaining about wake-up times, and discussing plans for their upcoming weekend pass. Maria continued eating, tuning them out as background noise. She had no interest in the social lives of new recruits. She'd seen hundreds of them come through over the years, each thinking they were special, each learning the hard way that the Army demanded more than they'd expected. The shorter soldier with the southern accent, whose name tag read Cooper, noticed Maria for the first time. His eyes swept over her rank insignia, noting she was a sergeant. He elbowed Jackson and tilted his head in her direction. "Didn't know we had company," he said with a smirk that Maria didn't like. She ignored the comment and continued eating her mashed potatoes. Years in the military had taught her that the best response to unnecessary attention was no response at all, but Cooper wasn't the type to let silence stand. "So, Sergeant," he said, leaning back in his chair with false confidence, "you always eat alone, or did we just get lucky?" Maria looked up briefly, her expression flat. The table was available. "I'm just eating lunch." "Fair enough," Cooper said, though his tone suggested he didn't actually think it was fair at all. He exchanged glances with his friends, a silent communication that Maria recognized from countless similar situations. They were testing her, trying to figure out if she'd be cool or if she'd be one of those sergeants who pulled rank over every little thing. She returned her attention to her food, hoping they'd lose interest. The tall soldier, whose name tag read Hayes, started talking about a girl he'd met off base, and the conversation shifted away from Maria. She relaxed slightly, thinking the awkward moment had passed. But then Jackson's phone buzzed, and he looked down at the screen. Whatever he saw made him laugh. A sharp bark of amusement that drew the attention of his friends. "Dude, look at this," he said, turning the phone toward Cooper and Hayes. They leaned in, their faces breaking into grins. "That's hilarious," Hayes said, shaking his head. "Where do people find this stuff?" "Internet's a beautiful place," Jackson replied, still chuckling. He scrolled through more content on his phone, and the three of them fell into a discussion about viral videos and social media trends. Maria paid no attention, focused on finishing her meal so she could leave. Then Cooper made a comment that cut through the noise of the mess hall like a knife. "Man, I couldn't imagine being old and still being just a sergeant. Like, what did you do wrong in life, you know?" The words hung in the air for a moment. Jackson and Hayes laughed uncomfortably, glancing around as if suddenly remembering they were in a public space surrounded by people of various ranks. Cooper seemed oblivious to the weight of what he'd said, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Maria felt the comment like a physical blow, but her face remained impassive. She'd heard worse over the years. The military could be brutal, especially to women, especially to those who didn't fit the mold of what people expected. She developed thick skin out of necessity. She wouldn't let some ignorant private get under her skin. But Cooper wasn't finished. Emboldened by the laughter of his friends, he continued, "I mean, I plan to be at least a staff sergeant by the time I'm her age, otherwise what's the point, right? Just stuck doing paperwork and going nowhere." Maria's jaw tightened. Her hands, which had been steady moments before, trembled slightly as she set down her fork. She told herself to stand up, to walk away, to not let this get to her. But something about the casual cruelty of the comment, the dismissive way he'd reduced her entire career to a punchline, made it impossible to move. Hayes, who seemed to have slightly more awareness than his friends, noticed Maria's change in demeanor. "Dude, maybe we should," he started, but Cooper cut him off. "What? I'm just saying what everyone thinks. If you're not moving up, you're moving out. That's how it works." He glanced at Maria, as if suddenly remembering she was there. His smirk faltered for just a second when he saw her face, but then he shrugged as if her reaction wasn't his problem. The mess hall continued its chaotic symphony around them, hundreds of conversations blending into white noise. But at their table, silence had fallen. Jackson had put down his phone, his earlier amusement replaced with discomfort. Hayes was staring at his tray, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. And Cooper, for all his bravado, was beginning to realize he might have crossed a line. Maria stood up slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile control she was maintaining. The tray remained on the table, her food only half eaten. She looked at Cooper directly, and for a moment he seemed to shrink under her gaze. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. What could she say? How could she explain years of sacrifice, of loss, of choices made for reasons these boys couldn't possibly understand? Instead, she turned and walked toward the trash bins near the exit. Her movements were mechanical, placing one foot in front of the other with deliberate precision. She could feel eyes on her now, other soldiers at nearby tables who'd overheard the exchange and were watching to see what would happen. The weight of their attention pressed down on her shoulders. She reached the bins and dumped her tray, the clatter of dishes against metal seeming louder than it should have been. And then, despite every ounce of training and discipline, despite the walls she'd built so carefully over the years, She felt the hot sting of tears in her eyes. Maria Santos, who had survived deployment to Afghanistan, who had coordinated supply runs under enemy fire, who had lost people she loved and kept going anyway, felt herself breaking in the middle of a crowded mess hall over the thoughtless words of a stupid kid who knew nothing about her life. She stood there, frozen, her back to the room, fighting desperately to maintain control. But the tears came anyway, silent and unwanted, streaming down her face as she gripped the edge of the trash bin. She wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but here. But her legs wouldn't move. The weight of everything she'd been carrying, everything she'd held inside for so long, had finally become too much. And that's when she heard it. A sound so unexpected that it cut through her anguish and made her turn around despite herself. It started with one person, then another, until the entire mess hall seemed to be moving. Chairs scraped against linoleum floors. Boots hit the ground in unison. Hundreds of soldiers, from privates to colonels, were rising to their feet. They were coming to attention. The vast room that moments ago had been filled with chaos and noise was now silent, except for the shuffle of movement as every person present stood at attention, their backs straight, their eyes forward, showing the kind of respect usually reserved for high-ranking officers or formal ceremonies. Maria stood there, tears still wet on her face, completely bewildered by what was happening. She looked around the room, trying to understand. Why were they doing this? What did it mean? Her eyes found Cooper's table, where all three young privates were now standing at attention, their faces pale with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization that something significant was happening. Then she saw him. Command Sergeant Major Robert Chen was standing near the center of the room, his hand raised in a salute. He was 53 years old, with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons that told the story of a decorated career spanning 3 decades. He was the highest-ranking enlisted soldier on the base, a man whose presence commanded instant respect. But he wasn't saluting the flag or an officer. He was saluting Maria Santos, and everyone in the room was following his lead, creating a moment of honor and recognition that transcended rank and regulation. The message was clear. This woman, this sergeant who had just been humiliated by an ignorant private, deserved their respect. And they were going to show it. Protocol be damned. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she stood there, overwhelmed by the sea of standing soldiers. The silence in the mess hall was profound, broken only by the hum of the industrial refrigerators in the back. She didn't understand what was happening, but the respect being shown to her was undeniable. Her tears continued to fall, but now they came from a different emotion entirely. She wasn't sure whether to return the salute or simply stand there, frozen in this unexpected moment. Command Sergeant Major Chen slowly lowered his hand and began walking toward her. The crowd parted naturally, creating a path as he approached. His face was serious but not angry, weathered by years of service and marked by experiences that had shaped him into a leader. When he reached Maria, he stopped a respectful distance away and spoke in a voice that carried across the silent room. "Sergeant Santos," he said formally, "would you please join me outside for a moment?" Maria nodded, not trusting her voice. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, trying to regain some semblance of composure. She followed Chen toward the exit, acutely aware that every eye in the mess hall was watching them. As they passed Cooper's table, she saw the 3 young privates still standing at attention, their faces drained of color. Jackson looked like he might be sick. Even Cooper had lost his earlier swagger, replaced by the horrified realization that he'd stepped into something far bigger than he'd understood. The door closed behind them, and Maria found herself standing in the bright Colorado sunshine, the contrast from the dim mess hall momentarily blinding. Chen walked a few steps away from the entrance and turned to face her. For a moment, he just studied her, his expression unreadable. "I apologize for putting you on the spot in there," he said finally, his voice gentler now that they were alone. "But I thought it was important. For you and for them." He gestured back towards the mess hall. "Especially for those 3 young fools at your table." Maria shook her head, confused. "I don't understand. Why did everyone stand? Why did you salute me? I'm just a sergeant. I'm nobody special." Chen's expression hardened. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to fix." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Sergeant Santos, how long have you been at Fort Carson?" 8 months, she replied automatically. "And before that?" "Fort Bragg." "Before that, Germany. Before that, Afghanistan." Chen nodded slowly. I know your service record, Sergeant. I make it my business to know the people serving under my watch. What I don't understand is why you've been trying so hard to be invisible. Maria looked away, focusing on the mountains in the distance. I'm not trying to be invisible. I'm just doing my job. No, Chen said firmly. You're doing more than your job. You're doing excellent work while simultaneously making yourself as small as possible, hoping nobody notices you, and I want to know why. The directness of the question caught Maria off guard. She wasn't used to senior leaders taking personal interest in her situation. Most were content to let her work in the background, appreciating her efficiency, while ignoring her as a person. But Chen wasn't like most leaders. He was looking at her with genuine concern, waiting for an answer. It's easier that way, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Easier to just blend in, do the work, not make waves. Easier for whom? Chen challenged. Not for you, I suspect, and certainly not for the army, which needs good NCOs like you to be visible, to lead, to mentor younger soldiers. He gestured back toward the mess hall, like those three in there who just learned a very hard lesson about respect. Maria felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She'd been running on empty for so long, keeping everything locked inside, that the idea of explaining it all to someone felt overwhelming. But Chen was waiting, patient and steady, offering her something she hadn't had in a long time. Someone willing to listen. I was engaged once, she began, the words coming slowly at first. His name was Lieutenant Daniel Martinez. We met at Fort Benning during a joint training exercise 7 years ago. He was infantry, I was logistics. Everyone said it wouldn't work, that our schedules would be impossible, that the army didn't care about our relationship. But we made it work anyway. She paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. Chen remained silent, giving her space to continue. We were both deployed to Afghanistan in 2019. Different forward operating bases, but we stayed in touch through emails and occasional phone calls. We planned to get married when we got back to the States. My sister was going to be my maid of honor. His brother was going to be his best man. We had the whole thing mapped out. Her voice cracked slightly. He proposed to me via video call. Can you imagine? He was sitting in his chew, surrounded by plywood walls and sandbags, and he pulled out this ring he'd been carrying around for months, waiting for the right moment. Chen's expression softened with understanding, and Maria knew he'd guessed where this story was going. But she continued anyway, needing to say it out loud. 3 weeks before we were both supposed to rotate back home, his convoy hit an IED. Daniel was killed instantly, along with 2 other soldiers in his vehicle. The army notified me within hours, but I was in the middle of coordinating a major supply movement. I had to finish the mission before I could fall apart. That's what we do, right? Mission first. I'm sorry, Chen said quietly. I can't imagine what that was like. Maria nodded, acknowledging his sympathy but not dwelling on it. When I got back to the States, everyone expected me to take time off, to grieve, to process what happened, and maybe I should have. But I couldn't stand the thought of sitting still, of having nothing to distract me from the loss. So I threw myself into work. I volunteered for every assignment, every extra duty, every opportunity to stay busy. But you also stopped advancing, Chen observed. Your record shows you were on track for promotion to staff sergeant. You had strong evaluations, command endorsements, everything you needed. And then it all just stopped. Maria looked down at her boots, shame washing over her. I turned down the promotion twice. I told them I was happy where I was, that I didn't want the additional responsibility. The truth is I was terrified. Daniel was always the ambitious one, the one who wanted to climb the ranks and make a difference. I was just along for the ride, happy to support him. When he died, I felt like I didn't deserve to keep moving forward without him, like it would be betraying his memory if I succeeded while he was gone. So you've been punishing yourself, Chen said, not unkindly, keeping yourself stuck in place because you think that's what you deserve. I guess so, Maria admitted. And after a while, it became easier to just accept it, to be the competent sergeant who does good work but never stands out, never causes problems, never asks for anything. It's safer that way. Less complicated. Chen was quiet for a moment, processing what she told him. Then he said something that surprised her. Lieutenant Martinez was my nephew. Maria's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? Daniel Martinez was my sister's son, Chen explained. He talked about you all the time in his letters home. Sent pictures. Shared stories about the amazing woman he was going to marry. My sister still has the last letter he wrote, where he talked about how excited he was to start a life with you. Tears were flowing freely down Maria's face now. I didn't know. He never mentioned having an uncle in the army. We weren't close, Chen admitted. Family dynamics, old disagreements, the usual complications. But when he died, it woke me up to how much time I'd wasted. I reached out to my sister, started rebuilding that bridge, and she told me about you, about how you disappeared after the funeral, how they tried to stay in touch but you'd cut yourself off from everyone who knew Daniel. I couldn't face them, Maria said brokenly. Every time I saw his family, all I could think about was everything we'd lost, all the plans that would never happen. It hurt too much. Chen stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. I understand that pain. I truly do. But Sergeant Santos, you're still here. You're still alive, still serving, still capable of doing incredible things. Daniel wouldn't want you to stop living just because he's gone. He'd want you to honor his memory by being the best version of yourself, by using your talents and skills to make a difference. I don't know if I can, Maria whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You're stronger than you think, Chen replied. The fact that you're still here, still serving, still showing up every day despite the pain you're carrying, that's strength. But strength doesn't mean carrying everything alone. It means knowing when to accept help, when to let people in, when to acknowledge that you can't do it all by yourself. Maria wanted to believe him, but years of isolation had built walls that couldn't be torn down with a single conversation. Those privates in there, she said, changing the subject slightly. They didn't know. They were just being stupid kids. Ignorance isn't an excuse, Chen said firmly. And those three are about to learn that their words have consequences. But that's not really what this is about, is it? It's not about what they said. It's about the fact that you believed it. Some part of you thinks they're right, that you failed, that you're not good enough. He was right, and Maria knew it. The comment had hurt so much because it echoed the thought she'd been having for years, the nagging voice in her head that told her she was wasting her potential, that she was letting everyone down, that she didn't deserve to be happy or successful. I want to try, she said finally, the words coming out stronger than she felt. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I want to try to do better. For Daniel, for myself. Chen smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him. That's all anyone can ask. And you won't be doing it alone. I'm going to assign you a mentor, someone who's been where you are and found their way through. I'm also going to recommend you for counseling services, not because there's something wrong with you, but because grief is a wound that needs proper treatment, just like any physical injury. What about in there? Maria asked, gesturing toward the mess hall. Everyone saw me break down. They saw me cry. How am I supposed to face them? With your head held high, Chen said immediately, because what they saw wasn't weakness. They saw a human being dealing with pain, and they responded with respect and compassion. That room full of soldiers just showed you that they see you, that they value you, that you matter to them. Don't run from that. Embrace it. They stood there for another moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Then Chen straightened slightly, returning to his more formal demeanor. I need to go back in there and address what happened. Those three privates need to understand why their behavior was unacceptable. But I want you to know something first. What's that? Maria asked. When everyone stood up in there, when I saluted you, that wasn't about rank or protocol. That was about recognizing sacrifice and service. You've given years of your life to this country. You've lost someone you loved in service to our mission. And you've continued to show up and do excellent work despite carrying that pain. That deserves recognition. That deserves respect. And whether you believe it or not, you are special. You are valued. And you are not alone. The words broke through Maria's defenses in a way nothing else had. She felt something shift inside her, a tiny crack in the walls she'd built, letting in a sliver of light. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a beginning, a possibility. Thank you, she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Thank you for seeing me. Chen nodded. Now, are you ready to go back in there? Or do you need a few more minutes? Maria took a deep breath, wiping her face one more time and straightening her uniform. I'm ready. They walked back into the mess hall together. The room had returned to its normal chaos, conversations resuming, trays clattering. life moving forward. But as Maria entered, she noticed something different. People were looking at her, but not with judgment or pity. They were nodding in acknowledgement, offering small smiles of support, creating space for her to pass. The atmosphere had shifted from curious spectacle to genuine respect. Cooper, Jackson, and Hayes were still sitting at the table where the incident had occurred, but now they were surrounded by several other NCOs who were clearly having a very serious conversation with them. Their heads were bowed, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Maria felt a pang of something, not quite forgiveness, but maybe understanding. They were young and stupid, making mistakes that would hopefully teach them to think before they spoke. Chen walked over to their table, and the other NCOs stepped back, giving him space. Maria stayed near the entrance, not wanting to interfere. She watched as Chen spoke to the three young soldiers, his voice low but carrying enough authority that everyone nearby went quiet to listen. "Gentlemen," Chen began, "today you learned an important lesson about the cost of careless words. Sergeant Santos, the woman you insulted, lost her fiancé in combat. Lieutenant Daniel Martinez died serving this country while coordinating a mission to protect soldiers just like you. Since his death, Sergeant Santos has continued to serve with distinction, putting aside her own grief to ensure that missions succeed and people stay safe. She's the kind of soldier we should all aspire to be." The three privates looked sick with shame. Cooper, who'd made the original comment, had tears in his eyes. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." "What you meant doesn't matter as much as what you said," Chen interrupted. "Words have power. They can build people up or tear them down. As leaders in this army, even as junior enlisted soldiers, you have a responsibility to think before you speak, to consider the impact of your words, to treat your fellow soldiers with respect regardless of their rank or circumstances." He paused, letting that sink in. "You will each write a formal letter of apology to Sergeant Santos. You will also complete an additional training module on professional military bearing and workplace respect. But more importantly, you will learn from this. You will do better, because if you don't, if you continue to show this kind of disrespect and ignorance, you will not succeed in this army. You will not become the leaders your soldiers need. You will simply be part of the problem, rather than part of the solution." The three privates nodded solemnly, their earlier arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. Chen dismissed them with instructions to report to their squad leaders, and they left the mess hall quickly, heads down, shoulders slumped under the weight of their mistake. Maria watched them go, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. She didn't want them to suffer, but she hoped they'd learn something valuable. Words mattered, people's stories mattered, and you never knew what battles someone was fighting behind their composed exterior. As the afternoon wore on, Maria returned to her office and tried to focus on work, but concentration proved impossible. Her mind kept replaying the events in the mess hall, the moment when hundreds of soldiers had stood to show their respect, the conversation with Chen, the revelation that he was Daniel's uncle. The world felt different somehow, as if a door she'd thought was permanently closed had suddenly cracked open, letting in fresh air and possibility. Around 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock on her office door. Maria looked up to see Master Sergeant Patricia Williams standing in the doorway. Williams was a force of nature in the logistics community, known for her efficiency, her direct communication style, and her ability to solve problems that seemed impossible. She was also one of the few people on base who'd tried to reach out to Maria when she first arrived at Fort Carson, inviting her to unit gatherings and coffee meetings. Maria had politely declined every invitation, keeping Williams at arm's length like everyone else. "Sergeant Santos," Williams said, her voice professional but warm. "Got a minute?" "Of course, Master Sergeant," Maria replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you?" Williams sat down and studied Maria for a moment. "I heard about what happened in the mess hall today. Actually, I think everyone on base has heard about it by now. News travels fast in the army." Maria felt heat rise to her cheeks. The idea that her breakdown was now common knowledge was mortifying. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "It was just a moment of weakness. Won't happen again." "Stop that," Williams said, not unkindly but with enough firmness to cut through Maria's defenses. "Stop apologizing for being human. Stop pretending you're fine when you're clearly not. And stop trying to make yourself small." The words were so similar to what Chen had said, that Maria wondered if they'd coordinated. But Williams continued, before Maria could respond. "I know what you're going through," Williams said. "Not exactly, because everyone's pain is different, but I understand loss. I lost my daughter 3 years ago. She was 17, killed by a drunk driver on her way home from school. One minute I was planning her senior year, helping her look at colleges, arguing about curfew. The next minute I was planning a funeral." Maria's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Most people don't," Williams acknowledged. "I don't talk about it much because it's hard, because people don't know what to say. Because sometimes it's easier to just focus on work and pretend everything's okay. But it's not okay. It will never be okay. And pretending otherwise doesn't honor Emily's memory or help me heal."
Ow.
She leaned forward, her expression intense.
After Emily died.
"I did exactly what you're doing now. I buried myself in work, pushed people away, declined promotions because I didn't think I deserved to move forward while my daughter was gone. I was existing, not living. And it took a good friend sitting me down and telling me the hard truth. Emily wouldn't want this for me. She'd want me to live fully, to honor her memory by being the best version of myself, to use my pain to help others rather than letting it destroy me." Maria felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. "How did you do it? How did you move forward?" "Slowly," Williams admitted, "and with help. I went to therapy, which felt like weakness at first but turned out to be one of the strongest things I've ever done. I let people in, even when it was scary. I started volunteering with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, turning my pain into purpose. I accepted a promotion and decided to be the kind of leader who sees the whole person, not just the soldier. It wasn't easy, and some days are still really hard. But it's better than the alternative. I've been stuck for so long," Maria confessed. "I don't even know how to unstick myself." "You start with small steps," Williams said. "Accept the help that's being offered. Go to counseling. Let Chen assign you that mentor. Stop eating lunch alone in corners and join other people at their tables. Say yes when someone invites you to do something outside of work. Start allowing yourself to have a life again." "What if I'm not ready?" Maria asked. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail, and you try again," Williams said simply. "But Maria, you're already failing by not trying. You're a talented NCO with so much potential, and you're wasting it because you're afraid. Daniel wouldn't want that. I didn't know him personally, but from everything I've heard, he was proud of you, believed in you, wanted you to succeed. Honor him by living the life he can't, by being the leader he'd be proud to see." The words settled over Maria like a challenge and an invitation. She thought about Daniel, about the dreams they'd shared, the future they'd planned. He'd always pushed her to be better, to believe in herself, to take risks. If he could see her now, hiding in the shadows and turning down opportunities, would he recognize her? Would he be proud of who she'd become? "I'll try," Maria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I'll try." Williams smiled, genuine and warm. "That's all any of us can do. And for what it's worth, you're not alone. There are a lot of people on this base who care about you, who want to see you succeed. You just have to let us in." After Williams left, Maria sat at her desk for a long time, staring at the wall and thinking about everything that had happened. The mess hall incident had cracked her open, exposing the pain she'd been carrying for so long. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe she'd needed to break before she could heal. She pulled out her phone and looked at the locked screen, which still displayed a photo of her and Daniel from their deployment. They were standing in front of a supply depot, dusty and tired but smiling, their arms around each other. She'd been avoiding looking at this photo for months, the memory too painful. But now she really looked at it, studying Daniel's face, remembering the sound of his laugh, the way he'd believed in her unconditionally. "I'm going to do better," she whispered to the photo. "I promise." The next morning, Maria woke up earlier than usual and went for a run on the base track. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Other soldiers were already out, some running, some doing calisthenics, everyone starting their day with physical training. Maria had been avoiding the communal PT sessions, preferring to work out alone in her quarters, but today she joined a group of NCOs doing a morning run, falling into step with their formation. Master Sergeant Williams was leading the group, and she shot Mariah a surprised but approving smile when she joined them. They ran for 5 miles, the rhythm of their footsteps synchronized, their breathing heavy but controlled. Maria felt muscles she hadn't used in a while, protesting, but it felt good to push herself, to be part of a team again, to remember what it felt like to be connected to something larger than her own pain. After the run, as everyone was cooling down and stretching, a captain approached Maria. His name was Thompson, and he worked in the operations section. Maria had coordinated with him on several supply missions but had never spoken to him beyond work-related conversations. "Sergeant Santos," he said, slightly out of breath from the run, "I wanted to say something to you about yesterday. What happened in the mess hall?" Maria tensed, preparing for awkwardness or unwanted sympathy, but Thompson surprised her. "I served with Lieutenant Martinez in Afghanistan," he said. "Different unit, but our paths crossed several times. He was a good officer, a good man. He talked about you constantly, showed everyone pictures, bored us all with stories about your adventures together." Thompson smiled at the memory. "When I heard about what happened to him, I wanted to reach out to you, but I didn't know what to say. I'm not good with emotional stuff. But yesterday, when Chen explained everything, I realized I'd been a coward. I should have said something sooner." Maria didn't know what to say. She hadn't realized how many people at Fort Carson had known Daniel, had connections to him, had been aware of her loss but hadn't known how to approach her. "He would have liked knowing you're here," Thompson continued. "He would have wanted you to know that people remember him, that his service mattered, that his sacrifice wasn't forgotten. And he would have wanted you to be okay, to move forward, to keep living." "I'm trying," Maria said, and it felt good to say it out loud, to acknowledge the effort she was making. "That's all any of us can do," Thompson replied, echoing Williams's words from the day before. "If you ever want to grab coffee and talk about him, share stories or memories, I'd be honored to listen." Sometimes it helps to remember the good times, to keep their memory alive through the stories we tell. "I'd like that. Maybe next week sometime?" "Whenever you're ready," Thompson said. "No pressure. Just know the offer stands." As the day progressed, Maria noticed more small changes. People who'd usually just nodded in passing now stopped to say good morning. Colleagues she'd kept at a professional distance invited her to lunch, to after-work gatherings, to weekend hikes in the mountains. Some mentioned knowing Daniel, sharing brief memories or stories. Others simply offered friendship without explanation or expectation. The 3 privates who'd caused the mess hall incident also sought her out. They appeared at her office late in the afternoon, looking nervous and genuinely remorseful. Cooper, who'd made the original hurtful comment, could barely make eye contact. "Sergeant Santos," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "We came to apologize. Not because Command Sergeant Major Chen told us to, but because we need you to know how sorry we are. What I said was cruel and ignorant, and I've been sick about it since it happened." Jackson and Hayes nodded in agreement. "We wrote the formal apologies like we were instructed," Hayes added, "but we wanted to say it in person too. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that." Maria looked at the 3 young men, seeing not the careless privates who'd hurt her, but soldiers who were learning, growing, making mistakes and trying to do better. They reminded her of herself at that age, before life had taught her hard lessons about loss and pain. "I accept your apology," she said. "But I want you to understand something. Everyone in this army is carrying something. We all have stories, struggles, pain that isn't visible on the surface. The words you use, the assumptions you make, they have power. They can wound people in ways you don't even realize. So from now on, before you speak, think about the human being in front of you. Give them the respect and dignity they deserve, regardless of their rank or position or how long they've been in service." "We will," Cooper promised. "And Sergeant, for what it's worth, we asked around about you after what happened. People told us about your work, about how you keep things running smoothly, about how reliable and competent you are. We had no idea. We judged you based on rank alone, and that was stupid and wrong. Learn from it," Maria said. "Be better leaders than you were yesterday. That's all I ask." The 3 privates left, looking lighter somehow, as if the weight of their guilt had been partially lifted by her forgiveness. Maria returned to her work, but her mind was elsewhere, processing the changes happening within her. The weeks that followed brought more transformation. Maria began attending counseling sessions with a military therapist who specialized in grief and trauma. The sessions were difficult, forcing her to confront pain she'd been avoiding for years, but they were also freeing. She learned that grief wasn't something to overcome or defeat, but something to carry differently, to integrate into her life without letting it define her completely. She accepted Chen's offer of a mentor and was paired with a senior master sergeant named Rodriguez who'd lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier. Rodriguez understood the unique pain of loving someone deeply and losing them, and he helped Maria navigate the complicated process of moving forward while honoring the past. She started socializing more, joining Williams and other NCOs for weekend activities. They went hiking in the mountains, visited local breweries, attended community events off base. Maria discovered that she could laugh again, could enjoy herself without feeling guilty, could make new connections without betraying Daniel's memory, and she accepted the promotion to staff sergeant. When Chen called her into his office 3 months after the mess hall incident and told her he was recommending her for advancement, she didn't turn it down. Instead, she thanked him, told him she was ready, and committed herself to being the kind of leader who saw the whole person, who led with compassion and strength in equal measure. The day she was promoted, there was a small ceremony with her unit. Friends and colleagues gathered to witness the changing of her rank insignia, to celebrate her advancement. Williams was there, beaming with pride. Thompson attended, along with several other soldiers who'd known Daniel and wanted to show their support. Even Cooper, Jackson, and Hayes came, standing in the back and clapping enthusiastically when the new rank was pinned to her collar. Chen conducted the ceremony, and when it was finished, he pulled Maria aside. "Daniel would be proud of you," he said quietly, "not just for the promotion, but for the work you've done on yourself, for the courage it took to open up and accept help. That's real strength, Sergeant. That's real leadership." Maria felt tears in her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd shed in the mess hall months earlier. These were tears of healing, of hope, of gratitude for the people who'd refused to let her disappear into her pain. "Thank you," she said to Chen, "for everything. For seeing me when I was trying to be invisible. For knowing Daniel. For giving me a reason to try again." "You did the hard work yourself," Chen replied. "I just pointed you in the right direction." That evening, Maria returned to her quarters and pulled out a box she'd kept hidden in her closet. It contained Daniel's letters, photos from their time together, the engagement ring he'd given her, mementos from their relationship. She'd been unable to look at these things for years, the pain too raw. But now she opened the box and went through each item slowly, remembering not just the loss but the love, not just the ending, but the beautiful story they'd shared. She found a letter Daniel had written to her shortly before he died, one she'd never been able to read. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and began to read his familiar handwriting. "My dearest Maria," it began, "if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I know you're probably angry at me for dying, for leaving you, for all the plans we made that won't happen now. I get it. I'd be angry too. But I need you to know something important. Loving you was the best decision I ever made. You made me a better person, a better soldier, a better man. And I need you to promise me something. Promise that you'll keep living fully. Promise that you'll chase your dreams and achieve everything you're capable of. Promise that you won't let my death stop you from being the amazing woman I fell in love with. I know it will be hard. I know you'll want to give up sometimes. But Maria, you are so much stronger than you think. You are brilliant and capable and deserving of every good thing. So please, for me, don't stop living. Honor my memory by being happy, by succeeding, by showing the world what I always saw in you. I love you forever, Daniel." Maria read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. But along with the grief, she felt something else. Permission. Daniel had given her permission to move forward, to be happy, to succeed. He'd known her well enough to understand that she might try to stop living after he was gone. And he'd left her this message to prevent exactly that. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then she took out a photo of the two of them, smiling and happy, and put it in a frame on her nightstand. No more hiding the past. No more pretending it didn't hurt. But also no more letting the pain be the only thing that defined her. The next morning, Maria walked into the mess hall for breakfast. It was the same space where she'd broken down months earlier, but it felt different now. She was different. She got her tray of food and scanned the room, looking for a place to sit. She could have found an empty corner, could have fallen back into old habits. But instead she walked over to a table where Williams, Thompson, and several other NCOs were sitting. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Williams grinned and pulled out a chair. "We'd be honored." Maria sat down and joined the conversation, listening to stories and jokes, contributing her own experiences, feeling connected to these people in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. And when the conversation turned to weekend plans and someone invited her to join a group going rock climbing, she didn't hesitate. "I'd love to," she said. "Count me in." As she ate breakfast surrounded by friends and colleagues, Maria thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The mess hall incident had been painful and humiliating, but it had also been a catalyst for change. It had forced her to confront the walls she'd built, to acknowledge the pain she'd been carrying, to accept the help that was being offered. She thought about Cooper and the careless comment that had triggered everything. In a strange way, she was grateful to him. His words had hurt, but they'd also created an opportunity for healing, for growth, for a community to come together and show support. He'd learned an important lesson about respect and the power of words. She'd learned an even more important lesson about vulnerability, connection, and the courage it takes to keep living after loss. Several tables away, she noticed the three young privates sitting together. Cooper happened to look up and make eye contact with her. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the crowded mess hall. Then Maria nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement and forgiveness. Cooper nodded back, relief visible on his face, and returned to his conversation with his friends. The mess hall continued its familiar chaos around her, hundreds of soldiers eating and talking and preparing for the day ahead. But Maria was no longer trying to disappear into the background. She was present, engaged, part of the living fabric of this military community. She was honoring Daniel's memory not by staying stuck in the past, but by moving forward with purpose and intention. She was still carrying the weight of loss. She probably always would. But now she understood that carrying grief didn't mean carrying it alone. It didn't mean refusing all help and all connection. It meant allowing others to share the burden, to remind her that she was valued, to celebrate her successes and support her through difficulties. As breakfast ended and people began clearing their trays, Williams turned to Maria and said something that would stay with her for years to come. "You know what I've learned about grief? It doesn't get smaller. We just get bigger around it. We grow in our capacity to hold both the pain and the joy, both the loss and the love. You're doing that work, Maria. You're growing, and it's beautiful to witness." Maria smiled, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. She was growing. She was healing. She was becoming the person Daniel had always believed she could be. And while he wasn't here to see it, while that absence would always ache, she knew in her heart that he would be proud. She stood up, straightened her uniform, and walked out of the mess hall with her head held high. There was work to do, soldiers to lead, a life to live. And for the first time in a long time, Maria Santos was ready to face it all. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because she'd finally learned that she didn't have to face it alone. The room had snapped to attention for her that day, showing her that she mattered, that she was seen, that she was valued. And now she carried that knowledge with her like armor, protecting her from the darkness while allowing her to step into the light.